Hey, Brianna.
Yes.
Actually, never mind. I see that I need to click over to attendees. Never mind, user error.
No problem.
Thank you, everyone who is joining us. We will try to start as close to 3 as possible. We do have about 170 attendees registered. So the question, looks like I had a question, but it went away. We will go through housekeeping before we get started with the presentation. So please bear with us while folks are joining. Yeah, I do want that higher. Hello, everyone. We are short from the number of folks who registered. However, attendees jumping on has slowed down a bit. So we will go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you for your time. Bear with me. I appreciate you joining all of us for the Multi-Kern County Coalition Grower Education Meeting. This year, we are providing a little bit different information. Of course, for the last several years, we mainly discussed the information regarding grower reporting, which is due by March 1st each year. Sorry, I have a bunch of things popping up on my computer screen. And this year, Ryan will go over kind of in a high, just briefing you on some of the changes to that reporting. Otherwise, we're really going to be focusing on different programs that we've been working on your behalf over the last several years and providing you updates for that information. And I am going to talk mostly today about the Kern Water Collaborative, which is the management zone entity that has been developed here in Kern County. And we will handle those requirements for our members. That being said, let me just pop off here so I can see a fuller screen. And Ryan, you can go ahead and start with the slides, please. So you, oh, sorry, before I do that, I'm glad we did the slides. I am going to turn it over to Brianna. Brianna's going to go over basically the housekeeping of a Zoom webinar. Many of you are familiar with Zoom, but I know some of you are not. So once she's done with that, I will hop back on. Brianna, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. Hi, I'm Brianna. I'm with the External Affairs team at Provost and Pritchard. So just a few Zoom housekeeping things. To ask a question directly or provide any comments, you can click the raise hand button. We are going to hold the questions verbally till the end, but if whenever we do that, you can hit the mute button, which is the microphone icon on the bottom of your screen. And the host will call on you by giving you the ability to unmute yourself to ask your question. And I know there's some of you that have called in on your phone. So in that case, you can press *6 to unmute from your phone. And as far as Q&A, like I said, verbally, we're going to wait till the end, but we do have the ability for you to type in your questions as the presentation is going on. So you can hit the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and send a question. You have the ability to do this throughout the presentation, either anonymously or not. And then speakers will get back to you with that question. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. And then for the chat, we're going to save the technical difficulty questions for the chat. So volume issues, anything that you might need to see on your screen, click the icon that is highlighted here on the bottom of your screen. And then you can click enter to send that question or comment. And keep in mind, make sure it says to either hosts and panelists, otherwise everyone will be able to see the comment. So that's your choice, but just make sure that that is set to the right setting. And then just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. We'll have the recording available on the website as soon as possible. And along with the slides, which I will enter into the chat, you can follow along as you like. But of course, it's going to be shared throughout the presentation here on Zoom. Be sure to complete the grower attendance survey as well to receive credit for your attendance today. Include all the memberships that you represent on the survey, as this represents the verification of your attendance. And like I said, the presentation will be posted, but viewing does not count towards meeting attendance. You need to complete the survey. And then Nicole, I'll hand it off to you.
Great. And of course, in talking about the Zoom webinar that's going to be posted to the website through YouTube, that is obviously not for all of you who are attending today because you are already in attendance. But if you know of anyone, or if you're going to be sending any other coworkers to the Zoom, you do want to make sure that they do the meeting attendance survey or they will not receive credit. Just wanted to clarify that. We did have somebody say they thought Brianna was on mute, which she wasn't, but I know you guys can hear us because other people are asking and answering questions, which leads me to believe we are good to go. So I am Nicole Bell, the manager of the Kern River Watershed Coalition Authority. I would imagine most of you know that by now. Because we are trying to cover a lot of new information today, many of the slides that I cover are in the packets for you as reference, as well as for folks who are not attending the in-person or the webinar, and will be referring back to the packets. So I will not go over all of these in detail. Just wanted to make sure you knew that I'm speeding through them for that reason. So today's agenda, as you can see, covers multiple different topics. Some are familiar to you, others are new, and Ryan and Marissa will be providing updates for those programs. There are 4 Kern Irrigated Lands coalitions. Most of you are aware, a majority of you are probably members of the Kern River Watershed Coalition Authority. We are the largest in Kern County, but of course we work hand in hand with the 3 other coalitions, the Buena Vista Coalition, the Coelho Water District Coalition, and the Westside Water Quality Coalition. And we, of course, have always done all of our outreach together to benefit our Kern County growers so that you don't have to attend meetings for each coalition to meet your general order requirements. There are slides included for each of the coalition leads. I'm sure you know how to access your coalition at this point, but just in case, again, you need to refer back. Here you go. And I did want to point out that Morgan Campbell, you may be familiar with her name. Morgan, of course, has, through PNP, been one of our technical consultants here for the KRWCA and other coalitions for many years now, and she has done much of the training programs that we're doing today. But Morgan has switched gears. She has changed positions and is now the regulatory manager at the Westside Water Quality Coalition. So she, as well as David Halapoff, which we let you know last year, are now at water districts and taking a managerial role in the Irrigated Lands program. So we welcome and congratulate both of them for taking on their new roles over the last year or so. As a reminder, of course, everybody is required to attend meetings at least annually. You will certify to your attendance through your, it's the sign and submit page, of course, when you file your reports on March 1. There is a yes, I have attended the annual meeting requirement, so make sure you do that. As far as registering for these meetings, you do need to register all entities that you are responsible for and participating in this meeting on behalf of, including their membership name, their ID number, and the coalition that they are with, so that those coalitions receive credit as well as have information to back your annual certification if the regional board ever does question that. So yes, to the people who have asked the question, you do need to register all members, all IDs with each of the coalitions for meeting attendance. And of course, this is all information that you guys know like the back of your hand. So Ryan, please continue. We've already discussed the Zoom webinar will be posted. Might be as early as the end of this week, but I'll guarantee it will be up by the end of next week so that anyone you know from your organizations who need to participate through the Zoom link can do so. And this is just a reminder how they get there. It is all on our home page at krwca.org. Same place you went when you registered for this actual Zoom webinar. And this year, yet again, you only have the one report that you will be doing. There will be no farm evaluation or management practice implementation program reporting this year, it will just be the irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report, as well as the irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet for the next year. So reporting is streamlined. And of course, the deadline date, as it has been since the beginning of this program 10 years ago now, if you can believe that, is March 1, 2024. And there are no extensions. So again, we do all of our reporting through your online portal. There are no regulatory extensions, but because of the way our program is set up, you have access to your memberships 24 hours a day. Just keep the March 1, 2024 deadline in mind. An annual AP enrollment reminder. I think this is important because I've been getting lots of emails from growers who have taken on acreage over the last year but hadn't enrolled it. So I do just want to underscore and remind everyone that all farmed irrigated acreage must be enrolled at the time you take it over. Do not wait for the annual enrollment period, which of course is always October 1 through November 15th, to get prepared for the next year. When you take on a new lease or purchase new ground, please do contact me immediately and I will help you get that acreage enrolled. Two things. One, that's critical so that you maintain compliance with the Irrigated Lands Program requirements. And two, so you can avoid the late payment fees for enrolling late. So this year for 2024, Irrigated Lands fees were $3 an acre. If you enroll late, you have to pay $10.50 an acre, and I would like to try to help everybody avoid those late fees. And of course, just a reminder, if you have questions at any time during my presentation, please do just raise your hand. Brianna showed you how to do that. You don't necessarily have to wait to the end of my presentation. You can raise your hand at any time. I do see there are chat questions, so we will try to get to those before I turn my presentation over to the next person. So I want to take most of my time to talk about CV salts. Last year was the first time I talked about CV salts and the nitrate control program, as well as the salt compliance program as an overview. And in your grower surveys of our meeting, you would ask that we spend more time on the CV salts and the management zone requirements. And of course, it is time now that we will be doing that. So that is what these slides are for the update to all of you to know how the CV salts requirements are being met. The coalitions are doing that on your behalf. And there is a new program that is now underway, and some of you may have received notices to comply from the regional board in the last couple of weeks. So just as a reminder, CV salts is the Central Valley Salinity Alternatives for Long-Term Sustainability. Has been in existence for about 15 years now. I have been heavily involved for the 10 years I've been here in Kern County, managing the Kern River Watershed Coalition Authority for what was then the new Irrigated Lands Program. Now I don't feel like we're so new since we're 10 years into it. But the CV salts requirements have now come about. The salt compliance program, which is the salt control program, which is made up of a P&O study, which is a prioritization and optimization study, which started about 4 years ago. The coalitions have collected funds from you for that program. You are required to participate in as a discharger in the Central Valley. So within our $3 an acre fee, the P&O study is covered, the nitrate control program is covered, that we pay those fees to the state, as well as state water quality control board fee, which is now up to about $1.20 or so an acre, and goes up each year, unfortunately. So the salt compliance program, we are collecting funds from you and handling that on your behalf. The nitrate compliance program, which is the nitrate control program, or management zone participation for most growers, is also handled by the coalition. And in fact, the notice to comply for that program has just been sent to dischargers in this area. Those notices were dated December 28th. So we all got them as a Christmas present. And they require all permitted dischargers to comply with the nitrate control program. So as a reminder, any enrolled acres, the coalitions are handling on your behalf, both for the salt compliance program and the nitrate compliance program. If you have other permits with the Regional Water Quality Control Board and you received notices to comply, you are responsible on your own to meet the requirements of both the salt compliance program and the nitrate compliance program for those permits or WDRs outside of the irrigated lands program. Next slide, Ryan. So in 2022, mainly it was the irrigated lands coalition leads got together and determined we really needed to be prepared for the nitrate control program coming about. We took the lead in Kern County to invite the regulated community to the table to start talking about this. One interesting thing is the irrigated lands program is a permit program specific to irrigated lands. The P&O study, or the salt compliance program, as well as the nitrate compliance program, are all permitted dischargers in a given area. So the nitrate control program is expanded over all permitted dischargers in Kern County. So although the irrigated lands folks took the lead, we invited all different permitted discharger leadership groups to the table starting in 2021, late 2021, and by 2022, we had the Kern Water Collaborative established. The boundaries, which I will go over with you, consist of the 3 sub-basins in Kern County, as well as a sliver of the Tulare Lake Basin in Kings County. And then the KWC board is made up of 11 different industry representatives. Irrigated Lands has 6 representatives. Those include 3 representatives that the Kern River Watershed Coalition board appointed. And then the 3 other Irrigated Lands Coalition managers are also on the board for KWC. Oil and Gas has 2 representatives. The dairy/cattle industry has 1 representative on the board, and then the food processors have 1, and publicly owned treatment works have 1 to make up a total of 11 industry representatives for the KWC Board of Directors. The Kern Water Collaborative, in order to, you might have noticed by the makeup of the board, Irrigated Lands has a majority share as the board and have main interest in this program. Because of that, and wanting to make things as efficient and financially effective as possible, the KWC is being administered and managed by KRWCA staff. That's me. The Kern Water Collaborative is housed within the KRWCA office, and from this point forward, we'll be sharing costs for overhead with KRWCA members, so that we hope not having to create a whole new entity with new management, new staff, their own office, all their own equipment, which is pretty costly. We are doing everything through the Kern River Watershed Coalition with the assistance of the other irrigated lands coalitions in order to keep fees down as much as possible. So I will be wearing 2 different managerial hats. You may see emails from me from KRWCA, but I might be talking about Kern Water Collaborative. We are working on emails, websites, and those types of things for Kern Water Collaborative. so that those types of things can be as separate as possible. But during startup, there will be some overlap. And then of course, moving forward, there will be the overlap of seeing my face for both of those programs. We will have 4 management zones managed by the Kern Water Collaborative. Next slide, please. And this map and the next map gives you a little bit of understanding of the area that we're going to cover. All of Kern County is covered by the Kern Water Collaborative. We have a small portion of the Tulare Lake. See that kind of sliver triangle? The reason we've included that, even though it's outside of Kern County, is because we wanted to make sure that all of our irrigated lands coalition boundaries were covered and handled through our organization. So if you are involved with the Westside Water Quality Coalition, you know that that coalition does include this sliver of land in Kings County. So we are including it with the Kern Water Collaborative. So we have that small sliver of a priority 2 subbasin in Tulare Lake. We have the entire west side south and Pozo subbasins here in Kern County. And then the third subbasin in Kern County, which is considered by the regional board as non-prioritized or unprioritized, is the Kern River subbasin. But for multiple reasons that I will discuss, we have included it early. So early being the regional board does not yet have a date in mind to prioritize that area, to provide a notice to comply to all permitted dischargers in that area. They are kind of rolling this program out in phases. You may notice that it says P2. So priority 2 are the subbasins we're in. For the last 5 years, subbasins north of us have been participating as P1 in the management zone program. We are P2, and Ryan, if you can go to the next slide. And the next slide, I think we have another map here. Okay, we don't. If you could back up to the map. Sorry, I thought I had a different map in there. So the reason we believe, and we have included the Kern River subbasin in the Kern Water Collaborative boundary areas, is so that irrigated ag can meet their general order requirements. The general order provided a 10-year time frame for irrigated ag to clean up all issues with nitrates. Our 10 years for this area is up in 2025. So as you can imagine, we have not solved all problems with nitrate. We are working towards that, and our reporting and our statistics are looking good, but it is not something that can be done by 2025. So in order to meet the requirements of the general order, all growers in this Kern River subbasin of Kern County need the additional 35-year compliance timeframe by participating in a management zone in order to meet the general order requirements. So we have included this so that we can make sure that all of our growers meet the general order requirements and have that additional 35-year time frame. With that said, I have had meetings with the Regional Water Quality Control Board staff, and we are hoping when we set up our plan for how we're going to address nitrates in these areas, and when we start to have to do domestic well testing and provide bottled water to folks who have affected wells, that we will be able to, in the future, phase in the Kern River portion, hopefully in line with the regional board's time frame on providing notices to comply to other discharger communities. So we are doing what we can to make sure our growers get the extra time, and the plan is not to do any more work that is necessary until the time that the regional board is going to do notice to complies to other dischargers in the area. Let me just take a moment to look at the chat to see if there are questions specific to what we're talking about. And team, if you, I don't see that there are. So team, if you can make sure just to bring to my attention if there are questions that I need to address, that would be great. So the nitrate control program brochure, we actually handed out a brochure at the in-person meeting last week. This brochure is in the program materials. It was also emailed out multiple times with the meeting invitation, and it can be obtained. You can see at the bottom of this page where you can obtain it if you wanted to see full-size copies, or for some reason you wanted to print it out. You could get clean copies there. But this is just really important because it gives you an update on what is required by priority 2 permitted dischargers. Talks about the 14-month time frame permittees have to select either pathway A or pathway B. Quite frankly, pathway B for a majority of dischargers, specifically irrigated ag, dairy, and others, is really the only option. And again, as I've mentioned, we have set up the management zone, so it will be available for all permitted dischargers in the area who receive this notice to come to us and join the management zone and share the costs of meeting the nitrate control program requirements in Kern County. The coalitions are all working on your behalf under the management zone to ensure that all enrolled acreage meets the salt and the nitrate control program requirements as well. So again, just information here to make sure that kind of at a glance, you can see what this new program is all about. And again, this just talks about priority 1, priority 2 areas, all the different permittees who are required to participate and meet the requirements of the nitrate control program. And Ryan, you can pop through those, that would be fine. In the brochure, as well as here, the CV Salinity Coalition, their website is here. This is a good website to go to learn more, kind of everything there is to know about CV salts, prioritization and optimization study for the salt control program, as well as priority 1 and priority 2 management zone information for the nitrate control program. We are in development for the Kern Water Collaborative website. In the meantime, the cvsalinity.org website is an excellent place to go. And the KRWCA website, although under construction, hasn't been updated in some areas for a bit, does have information regarding CV salts as well. But again, I would go to the cvsalinity.org website. And then of course, once KWC website is up and running, permitted dischargers who need to meet the requirements and who will potentially be joining the Kern Water Collaborative will be notified. But of course, you as members, since your enrolled irrigated acres will be part of the management zone, we'll also keep you informed of when the website is up and running so that you can stay informed of what the Kern Water Collaborative is doing. We also anticipate for the Kern Water Collaborative, there will be meetings throughout the year to not only educate the permitted dischargers, receive input from the permitted dischargers, which includes irrigated lands, but also meetings to interact with the disadvantaged communities in order to make sure they understand what is taking place in the management zone and their ability to request that their wells be tested. Not at this time. This will be over a year from now, since there is a 14-month time frame to submit our plan before we have to start testing water. But once that happens, there will be lots of different community type meetings throughout the county that you may choose to participate in. You may not choose to participate in. We will do our best as coalition managers to make sure you know which meetings might behoove you. But most importantly, we'll make sure that we're giving you updates at our typical irrigated lands update meetings so that you don't have to worry about squeezing other program meetings into your already busy schedules. That said, are there any questions related to Kern Water Collaborative, nitrate control program requirements? Any of that? Don't see any raised hands or chat questions. So with that, I will invite you to reach out to me at any time if you do have questions. I think everybody knows where to reach me, and I'm happy to assist you with any of the questions that you might have. And Ryan, am I turning it over to you or Marissa next?
Yep. I'll go ahead and jump in here. So
Right.
hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Again, my name is Ryan Dodd. Good to meet with everyone again here for another year. So several things to talk about today. So we're going to talk through the ILRP farm regulatory submission process very briefly. This is definitely going to be mostly a review, and we're trying to minimize some of the details we spend on that this year. But then we're going to, because we've talked about, it's pretty similar to previous years, going to talk about some emerging regulatory changes in a brief way, and then talk about some things such as the groundwater trend monitoring program that we haven't talked about in a while at these meetings, and then some on-farm drinking water well monitoring. So with that, we'll jump right into the regulatory reporting process for crop harvest year 2023. So just a diagram here, this is very similar to slides that if you've attended this meeting for more than for a year or two or more, you've seen these before. So just kind of, again, just overview, highlight, more of a reminder, more so than details. But what is the process for submitting your irrigated lands paperwork for the year? Well, in general, the first part could or should be logging into ILRP Farm or online grower portal, where you can submit your information to the coalition. That's the mechanism of which you submit your paperwork to the coalition. So how do you log on to ILRP Farm? This is an example of KRWCA here, but all the systems are look similar and same functionality. So you go to, in this case, krwca.ilrpfarm.com, and this can be accessed through krwca.org or your other coalition websites. And then you enter your username or password, and then you're in the system, and you can navigate to where you need to go there. So certainly step one that we would recommend for this regulatory reporting process would be to review the nitrogen analysis report, or the NAR, kind of step one. And so why is that? But we really encourage folks to review their NAR first for any issues from the previous year. So let's say you had some outliers, or some error fields, or just some issues, or some data that was surprising in one way or another. Well, ideally, this NAR is more of a report card. We've talked about it in detail before. We'll just briefly touch on it here, but essentially it's like a report card of the information that you submitted to the coalition for the previous year. And so, especially if you've got, permanent crops and things like that, but really any crops at all, if there were issues in the previous year, hopefully this NAR, among other things, can help try to address those issues and fix them maybe in the upcoming year. So before you go to do your irrigation nitrogen management plan worksheet for the 2024 crop harvest year, which is your nitrogen plan for the upcoming year, we really encourage you to go back and review your previous results to see if there are any outliers or things like that. So hopefully we can fix them moving forward, right? Because in general, we don't want errors or outliers and things like that. So really encourage that to be the first step of your process, and you can access your NARs via ILRP Farm. Years ago, we used to mail out those packets, but now those are exclusively available through ILRP Farm, and you can access those digitally or print them on your own if you'd like. So in order to really understand that NAR, and hopefully this is mostly review, but what is these terms A over R or A minus R or AR? Well, A is just the total applied nitrogen that you report via the INMP summary report. And R is the nitrogen removed from the field and plus potentially sequestered in the permanent tissue. And so that's a calculated value, an average calculated value that the coalition calculates on your behalf. So then all we do is basically take those A and R values and divide them or subtract them, right? So pretty basic in terms of the math there. But why do these metrics matter? Well, they're metrics used for nitrogen use efficiency. And so that's there's a lot to that statement, and we're going to talk more about that in later slides. But it's a possible future regulatory metric, or essentially it will be in various forms or fashions, A over R, A minus R, some type of regulatory metric. And although we do not have appropriate A over R ranges right now, those are actively being developed, and we have a slide to talk about that a little bit more in the presentation. But just keep in mind that these A over R metrics are not, metrics of nitrogen efficiency that to some extent growers either as a whole or a coalition or a township or even an individual field may be judged upon to evaluate nitrogen efficiency. So we talked about accessing the NAR in ILRP Farm. So there's a couple ways you could do that here. You can either access it via the toolbar over here on the left once you've logged in. It says nitrogen analysis reports. Or when you log into your main dashboard, there's a big orange bar here that you can hit view reports and access your NAR. So only one slide in terms of overview in the NAR this year, but there's really 6 main sections of the NAR here. And so it's just your general information, and then we have a history over the past few years of your number of outlier fields, if any. And then, of course, you can use this drop-down menu to select previous year's NARs or print a PDF. And then we have this general section here that's going to have a big red button that says outlier, if you will. If you are an outlier, or a nice green box there that says not an outlier if you're not. And so although we spend a decent amount of time talking about outliers and these things, overall, certainly in KRWCA, but most coalitions, there's very few outliers, probably way less than 10% of all the fields, probably more like less than 5% of the fields that are actually outliers. So it's a relatively minimal thing, and that's a good thing. But, you know, of course, we want to minimize that as much as we can. So if you do have one or more outlier fields, this will say outlier here. Then there's a little legend on how you interpret the individual graphs. And then down below to the rest of the NAR will be a field by field report of all your results. So this is your nitrogen values that you submitted to the coalition, the yield that you submitted to the coalition, and then some of the calculated nitrogen removal and A over R ratios that the coalition calculates. And then a little graphic showing your outlier status, with the black dot being each individual field and where it stands in terms of green, yellow, or red. So really how we encourage folks to review this NAR is think about a stoplight approach. And this is pretty consistent throughout ILRP Farm as well. Is, you know, in general, green is okay, or maybe good. You know, some of the terminology can vary there, but yellow is still okay, but it's getting a little higher. Let's think of it as a warning. And then in general, red, meaning outlier, potentially erroneous, or at least questionable, certainly something that we want to look at there. So spend some time looking at this NAR and extract what value that you can get out of it, especially if you have outliers. So ideally, we can minimize outliers in future years, if possible. So tools and resources. This is a very similar slide we showed for a number of years, but there are a couple additional things to it now as well. So what do I do if I didn't make any errors, but I still have outlier fields? So what do we do about that? Well, there's not a single answer for that, to be sure, but there's a number of suggestions and resources that the coalition and other partners, some of which are here today and are going to present at the end of this presentation from the coalition to support you navigating these efforts. But if you do have outlier fields, if you're not already, you must certify future INP worksheets. For example, if you have low vulnerability area fields that are outliers, you must certify your INP worksheets moving forward. We have a slide on certifying here soon as well. We always encourage folks to review the information with your coalition and certified crop advisor or agronomist. We do have folks on staff here that can talk through your nitrogen analysis reports and other things and try to help you with that. But of course, your on-farm advisor, if you work with folks, probably be even better. We have the California Fertilization Guidelines, which are an extremely valuable source to help guide nutrient management for many of the main crops in the area. So certainly can't encourage that resource enough. We also have this Crop Manage, which is a online free decision support tool that really helps guide not only irrigation management, how much to irrigate and when, but also some nitrogen dynamics and recommendations too. So this is some of the best available research that we have available in Crop Manage is compiled in this decision support tool there, and including more of the nut crops, almonds and pistachios are now there, and more Central Valley crops. It's historically been used extensively in the Central Coast with cool season vegetables, but this is a great tool to get customized recommendations on irrigation and nitrogen management. So definitely would highly recommend using that, or at least looking into it. We have the UC nitrogen course, which is just a few hour course on all things nitrogen management that may help. And this is what we're going to have a presentation on later in this webinar as well, is the Nitrogen Irrigation Initiative. And so that's an emerging grant-funded resource that's could provide a lot of value to some growers. And then our Southern San Joaquin Valley Management Practices Evaluation Program. So just some resources to there if you're really trying to figure out what's going on with your outlier fields and try to get a handle of that. So just an example of some of these tools and resources, something I use a decent bit at this link here is some of the nitrogen uptake and partitioning curves. So you can actually get at the timing of your nitrogen application a little bit with some of these curves. So we have days of the year from 0 to 360 here, and then the total nitrogen in almond trees, including the roots here. And so you can kind of just see when the main demand for nitrogen uptake by many of the crops listed here, and there's many, just to try to help you time your nitrogen a little bit better. It's just an example, but there's a lot of other information on there that can really help guide your nitrogen management if you think there's opportunities for some improvement there. So I mentioned the Nitrogen Irrigation Initiative. So this is just a plug for about a 30-minute presentation we're going to have at the end of today's webinar. But basically, this is a significant new grant-funded program that, in addition to other things, offers free on-farm consultations, to my understanding. So there's a website there, and we'll let some of our guest speakers talk a little bit more about that today. But you have this slide here that provides some information. But basically, you could get some customized help on nitrogen and irrigation practices. So that could be very valuable, and would certainly highly encourage that. And this is going to come more into play as we talk about some of these more emerging regulatory items later in the webinar. In other words, we're going to have to make some more progress than we've made to date, and this is a good example of a resource to help us do that. There are also, the state of California is throwing in a bunch of money to try to help improve irrigation and nitrogen management. This is just a plug, not much details on this yet, but there are going to be some additional nitrogen and irrigation trainings funded through the California Department of Food and Ag Water Efficiency Technical Assistance Grant Program, or WETA. And so there's basically going to be a curriculum that's really focused on helping us address some of these emerging regulatory items we're going to talk about later in this webinar. So we'll continue to share this information when we have it, but there will be some activities in the Bakersfield area as well for this new program in 2025 and 2026. So the irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet. So this is our nitrogen plan for the upcoming year. So we've reviewed our NAR, we've understood any potential issues that are happening there, and now we're thinking about the steps moving forward and how we may adapt our nitrogen plan moving forward. So throughout the years, we've went into this, how to complete this worksheet and all the calculations. And I do see some of the questions, so I'll get to those here in just a bit, best I can. But some of the irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet items we've talked about in a lot of detail, excruciating detail in the past. We're not going to do that today, but we are just going to kind of remind you of the form and know that it reminds you of the process. But well, we have been working on KRWCA's YouTube page for some of the outreach videos. And so the 2021 webinar did have a more detailed example of how to complete this INP worksheet. And so if you're interested in that or you need a refresher there, that is available to you at KRWCA's YouTube page. But for today, we're just going to do an overview of that. So this is your INP worksheet here. This is just a hypothetical example that I created just for demonstration purposes. Again, we have our recommended or planned column that we complete before the season. And then we have, after we finish the season, we have our actual nitrogen column here. And so the boxes that I highlight in red there are basically the information from this form that gets reported to the coalition via the INP summary report. So this INP worksheet must be completed by March 1 every year. And so keep that in mind. And there's a lot of details there. And so if you have questions about that, see the previous video. You can ask the coalition or work with your advisor on those details. So as I mentioned about the certification requirement, so hopefully this is mostly a review, but there have been some changes in the past few years when this INP came along. So we like to at least have a slide on it. But if you're in a high vulnerability area or you have an outlier field, you must certify the INP worksheet, as I said earlier. And that can either be done via professionals listed in the ILRP permit or WDR or general order. This does not include PCAs, but include things like certified crop advisors that have some specific nitrogen training. And then there's also the grower self-certification program, which I have a slide about on the next slide. In terms if you are a self-certified grower, the continuing education requirements remain the same as they have in the past. You need 3 hours for every 3-year cycle according to your your certification date. So the INP Grower Self-Certification Program, if you've been around in the program for a while, you probably, and completed this program, you probably attended an in-person class where we spent about 4 hours running through this in quite some detail. But as of 2022, the California Department of Food and Ag Fertilizer Research and Education Program, or CDFA FREP, actually in kind of in collaboration with the coalitions to some extent, actually created an online program for this. And that's almost certainly a good thing, although there's not as many, if any, in-person classes happening as a result of that. But this is a free program. Maybe takes 2 to 4 hours to complete with a 30-question exam, and it's on demand, so you can access it at any time. And in addition to just becoming self-certified, we'd recommend you go through this program even if you already are self-certified and you haven't done it, because it may help improve your irrigation and nitrogen management a little bit. So again, just another resource to not only be self-certified, but to also maybe help with some improved irrigation and nitrogen management there. So definitely recommend checking that out if you're interested. So the continuing education. So let's say you're already certified and you need your 3 hours. This is going to be the main website here on the screen. You could Google search or your favorite search engine, CDFA FREP Continuing Education, and it'll pop you up to this website here where you can find where you can get your 3 hours every 3 years to maintain your certification. If you don't get those continuing education hours, your certification can expire, and then you would have to go and retake this course to become recertified. So neither of which is necessarily that big of a deal and could take similar amounts of time. So it's really whatever works best for your preference there. Okay, so now as we're stepping through the regulatory form reporting process in ILRP Farm. So now we've transitioned from reviewing our NAR. We've completed our INP worksheet for the upcoming year. And you could flip-flop these to some extent, but really we're going to go into ILRP Farm to submit our INP summary report, which is the way the coalition, it's kind of the culmination of this whole nitrogen process, is sending your data to the coalition. But the first step of that in ILRP Farm is we have to build your farm in a module called Farm Builder. Again, hopefully this is also mostly a reminder, but we're just going to very briefly touch on that this year. So Farm Builder is where you go through and you build your farm field by field, ideally. So each discrete field you have in this case. So in the map shown here, we have, let's say 2 parcels, but we could call them 2 fields. And so we need to build 2 fields. In this case, maybe carrots and pistachios, for example. And so you go through and build those. If nothing changed from last year in terms of the fields themselves, they will roll over year to year. And so that can be a great convenience to make things easier from year to year. So you're going to build your fields, and then when we go into each field, there's some information here that we enter, such as the field ID, the crop, the date planted, and then we enter our acres and things like that in your irrigation system. And once you have your field built, you hit Save Changes, and you're essentially done with that once you edited your field details. So just a very brief reminder on Farm Builder there. There's a lot of details there. But again, we have talked about that a lot before as well, but of course are available to support you through that as needed. So you build your field or your farm in Farm Builder on a field by field basis. If you have 50 fields, you would build 50 fields. If you have 1, you would build 1, and you finish that. Then you can move into your irrigation and nitrogen management plan summary report to actually submit your nitrogen management practice and yield information to the coalition. So the first step of the INMP summary report is the survey questions. This is pretty straightforward. It's just basically you go through here and you click on every one of these boxes. Let's say water application scheduled to need. Do you use this practice or not on this field? If you do, you click on it, a little green checkbox will appear. If not, you leave it blank. And you would repeat that for every single field for both irrigation efficiency practices and nitrogen efficiency practices. And so really the only new thing to highlight here is that we did add a little more of the data feedback just to help coalition members out a little bit more here in this little gray bar that you see. You see it says, like, for example, here, 98% implemented or 81% implemented. So what this represents is just the number of growers of that crop that implement that practice in your coalition. Or in Kern County in this case. And so that's just valuable information. Maybe there's an opportunity to say, I'm not, for whatever reason, scheduling my water application to need, but I see that 98% of other carrot growers or 99% of pistachio growers are. Perhaps there's opportunity to maybe consider using that practice on my operation. So just a little more data feedback to you on the system to maybe provide some value and some more information on in terms of what peers in your area are doing in terms of the management practices. So now we move into the nitrogen and yield component of the reporting. And so this is somewhat straightforward, although coming up with these numbers, it can be a lot of work. But once you have the numbers, entering them into the system is somewhat straightforward. You just enter how much nitrogen you applied from each individual component here, your yield. And as long as you've got kind of all green here and no red or yellow areas, then you're really good to continue with your submission of your reports. But with that, there is a lot of live validation in ILRP Farm. So if you think of that stoplight approach I mentioned earlier, so although it can be just fine to have red or yellow on here, it's just something that we want to consider just to make sure that we didn't make any mistakes or anything like that. So, but just as this is no change from previous years, but if items are flagged red, we are going to require you to click this more info box and just provide us a little more information that maybe help us understand what happened. And it may also minimize some calls from the coalition as we do our QA quality control process as we evaluate all the submitted data. So once you have that, once you hopefully have your INMP summary report mostly looking clean and no major errors there, or if you do have some red flagging, you've at least provided us a little more information on that. You're good to go through to the sign and submit page and submit it to the coalition. This page doesn't require too much effort. Just did you attend an outreach event? If you're here today, you could select yes. Then we just want to go through and make sure that we don't have any errors on our reports, and then basically sign and certify and submit our INMP summary report. Then a little PDF pops up here if you want to print or save that for your records. And then essentially your report is submitted to the coalition there. And then the last thing is just to review your previous year's outlier status. This is at the bottom of the sign and submit page. So this is similar to the NAR, but as coalitions, we are required to provide you this additional feedback there. If you are an outlier, there's just a couple of little questions here to answer. And so that is the end of the ILRP farm. So just a brief overview of the grower reporting process there. But then I'm going to jump into some emerging regulatory items here. So all of this stuff, the reason we're doing nitrogen reporting is because there's issues with nitrate in groundwater that have been well documented over the years. It's why the groundwater component of the irrigated lands regulatory program exists. And so some of these metrics and new nitrogen efficiency metrics were inevitable with the program and have been in the plan for a while, but they're just taking a while to roll out in this new paradigm of the irrigated lands program. So one of these, and probably the very substantial one, is called a groundwater protection values and targets. We typically may just call it groundwater protection targets. And so what is that? What does it mean? It's a very detailed topic, but essentially for now, we're still working out the details. This is just a substantial new nitrogen efficiency metric or a quantifiable milestone, and it's all on the township basis. So this is not being applied to necessarily individual fields, but it's aggregated up to a township basis. And so in the future, although it's somewhat uncertain exactly how this is going to play out right now, this will almost certainly be a primary grower nitrogen metric moving forward. And so there's going to be a lot more information about this in the future, but we're just prepping you so that this stuff doesn't catch folks by surprise. So groundwater protection values are estimated from the INP summary reports that you submit to the coalition, and they're basically just the result. You know, what actually was the result of the discharge? You could think maybe like A minus R type result for that township. So that's what actually happened, or at least our best estimate of what happened for that township is the value. And then the target is just the allowable amount of nitrogen discharge within a township to protect water quality. And these are going to be dynamic and updated every 5 years. A lot of complicated modeling went in to develop that, both with root zone and groundwater models. And so this is, something that's never really been done before on this scale. But basically, the value is what actually happened, and the target is the regulatory requirement of what should have happened. And then every single year, coalitions will compare the values to the targets to evaluate compliance within a township. And you've heard me mention a lot about the Nitrogen Irrigation Initiative, Crop Manage, some of these other initiatives and programs and resources for growers. Well, a lot of that is going to be meant to address that if a township's groundwater protection value does not meet the required target, growers in those townships must address those issues. And so how do we address those issues? Well, in general, it's improving irrigation and nitrogen management. Some of those programs that we talked about in the presentation at the end of this webinar are parts and pieces to that to help us try to find ways to address those issues. So stay tuned on groundwater protection targets. Nothing is officially rolled out yet to coalition members, but certainly within the next year or two, there will be more information on this. Similar to the groundwater protection target process is A over R acceptable ranges. I kind of touched on that earlier on the A over R slide. So unfortunately, this is another new nitrogen efficiency metric. But this one is a little less focused on groundwater quality explicitly because you can't use A over R to estimate nitrogen loading to groundwater. But this is more focused on grower nitrogen efficiency at the field level. So this is more of a field by field metric that could be used to assess performance. And what it's supposed to be is a more agronomically appropriate AR ratios by crop. And so in the future, this information may replace the statistical outlier process that we've been using for a while now. And so why is it a range? So the lower end of the range is basically the lowest that is routinely achievable and more optimum, let's say maybe research conditions, where it's highly efficient. We've got nitrogen use efficiency values in the maybe 90%, something like that, like technically achievable, but maybe not practically achievable in many cases. And then the high end of the range is the ratio that should be achievable in most cases in real settings. So this is an even newer program that's coming than groundwater protection targets, but the coalitions are working in the background on developing this process, and we'll certainly have more information to share with you as that process develops. So we also wanted to touch on the groundwater quality management plan because it's been a long time since we've really talked about this. So what is the groundwater quality management plan, or what many coalitions call the comprehensive groundwater quality management plan? But that's essentially each coalition. This is a coalition by coalition plan, although the coalitions certainly collaborate on the details of that. But it's essentially the coalition's detailed plan on how to address groundwater quality issues. In this case, mostly nitrate, but there are some salinity and pesticide issues in there as well. But we'll just think about it mostly as nitrate for today. And this is essentially this umbrella plan that encompasses all ILRP groundwater components. So every single thing that you've heard about under ILRP groundwater related are talking about at this meeting. For example, we're going to talk about groundwater trend monitoring here on the next slide. But there's things like the Management Practices Evaluation Program. In the past, you've heard us talk about the Groundwater Assessment Report, all the INMP reporting, the groundwater protection targets and AFR acceptable ranges I just talked about. All those items fit under the groundwater quality management plan. So it's a very significant document for the coalition on your behalf as growers, because we're implementing these plans and processes on your behalf as members. And so what this plan does is provide performance measures that the coalitions are evaluated on. So essentially setting up criteria that the coalition is judged upon for compliance. Are we making progress? Are we addressing the groundwater quality issues that exist? And how are we doing that? Just wanted to make note that this plan, for the first time since about 2018 for KRWCA at least, is going to be updated by July 1, 2024. And that's mostly to incorporate that groundwater protection target process that I mentioned as we begin to implement that program. But just letting you know that this exists. There's a lot going on in the background that the coalitions are working on that we don't always talk about at these meetings. But for whatever reason, if you're interested on more details of this, all the documents are available, and we also submit annual status reports on the process or progress that the coalition is making, the process and the progress that the coalition is making for these items. Okay, so one of those items that we haven't talked about in a while at these outreach meetings is the groundwater quality trend monitoring program. Again, this is under the groundwater quality management plan that I just mentioned, but as the name implies, it is where we're actually monitoring trends in groundwater quality. So why do we do this? Why are we doing a groundwater trend monitoring program? Well, as I'm sure many can probably guess, for the most part, it is required. We don't do these programs for fun. We do them because they are required in the general order, and we must do them. But why is it required? Well, in terms of the way the regulation is written, it's to essentially evaluate long-term trends in groundwater quality that may be partially influenced by irrigated ag. And so there's a lot of details there, but essentially we're just trying to look at these long-term trends in groundwater quality. And that's mostly as it relates to nitrate, but we do test for other salinity and pH and dissolved oxygen as well. And then every 5 years, we look at some additional salinity and general mineral components. So how are wells selected for this program? We talk about our well network, which is just a network of many wells that each coalition has. So how do we select those wells? Well, this is a very significant point because we only use existing wells. To my knowledge, certainly in the southern San Joaquin Valley, there's not been a single monitoring well that was drilled for a part of this program. And this is a huge success story, I think, on behalf of the coalition and its members, because there was a lot of the original thought that was thinking we may have to have 2 or 3 monitoring wells installed in each township across the coalition, which could have cost millions and millions of dollars. But throughout negotiation and kind of some proactive, innovative development, we haven't had to do that at all. And we've only been able to use some very specific criteria to use existing wells to still meet the compliance needs of this part of the ILRP program. So these existing wells, there's a lot of very specific criteria that must be met. But essentially, the wells need to be representative of regional impacts of irrigated ag and represent both high and low vulnerability. And so we go through thousands of well completion reports to basically figure out which wells may meet this criteria. And if they meet the criteria, then we may add them to our GTM network. And for KRWCA, this is maybe a little hard to see, but this is just a map with each of the little red dots represents a well in the network. And so you can kind of see we've got some pretty good spatial coverage, but we're going to talk about that spatial coverage and potentially needing more wells in a subsequent slide. So the GTM well network status for 2023 for KRWCA. Again, this varies for every coalition, but at least from the KRWCA perspective, we have about 56 active wells that were available for sampling. Originally, throughout this program, when we were reviewing wells, we got about 30 wells that met in the Kern County area, or at least KRWCA, that met the specific criteria that we had. Lots of negotiation with the regional board. They wanted more wells, more. And so we adjusted our criteria a little bit, ended up with about 61 wells, somewhere in there. But of course, this is a dynamic network for many reasons, some of which you can see there on the screen. And so for 2023, we had about 56 wells that were active for sampling. And we successfully sampled about 41 of those. And then we had about 15 wells that could not be sampled for various reasons listed here. Maybe it was just pumps or wells that needed repairs and different issues or ownership changes, or just wells that were removed from the network for various reasons. And so we were only able to sample about 41 of the 56 active wells in 2023. So some of the results, just very briefly talking about the results and where is this program going? This component of the program, is it getting better or worse? And just giving an update on that. But just a reminder that these results are not made to be intended to measure the impact of specific management practices on a ranch or a field. Again, this is much more of a large scale, landscape level type evaluation that we're looking at. As you can imagine, there's a lot of details when we have about 56 wells every year, plus or minus, that are sampled. So we're not going to get into all that details today, but just a little high level summary here from 2023 from KRWCA's results. So results essentially for nitrate nitrogen range from, let's say, non-detect, which let's say very low, all the way up to about 37. And so the maximum contaminant level for drinking water, or just kind of that rule of thumb limit, is about 10, or is 10 milligrams per liter, or ppm. And so their average value of the wells was about 9, and the median was about 7.1. And so 63% of the results were less than or equal to 10, which is good. But about 36% of the results were over that MCL limit. Now, many of these were pretty much none of those were used for drinking water. They're just irrigation wells. They're not necessarily assessed in the same way as drinking water wells, but still, it just gives you some insight that, hey, as we already know, there are some nitrate impacts in groundwater in many of our coalition areas, hence why the ILRP program exists, and hence why various programs like this exist to continue to monitor that. So some questions that we get asked sometimes is, hey, are things getting better? Are things getting worse? And what does that look like overall for the coalition? So just a very simple graph here where we kind of summarize some select wells. But essentially at this point, this is a long-term program. It really is variable. Some nitrate concentrations are going up, some are going down, some are steady, and it really just varies by well. So at this point, we can't really make any definitive conclusions overall as a coalition. Is groundwater quality improving or not in terms of nitrate? It really varies by well, and we just don't have enough data and information yet to really make any broad conclusions. But that's not surprising. That was expected, and that's part of the long-term program. That's why we're continuing to work through implementing this program. So we'll continue to share some of these results with you in the future as we can draw more conclusions about some of these results. So just again, we just wanted to say, thank you for the communication on scheduling for the sampling. This is a collaborative approach, and we just really appreciate the communication there. KRWCA will be sending out results letters. Some have went out, but we're continuing to finish that up and get those results to members that have their wells sampled as soon as possible. But just kind of to wrap up the groundwater trend monitoring presentation here, what are the next steps for the program? Where is it going? Well, more wells are needed essentially. And this is driven by regional board's request. They say that more wells are needed, that there's some spatial gaps or wells that are no longer viable. And for KRWCA in particular, they want some wells along the southern border of KRWCA's primary boundary, west of Interstate 5, so where this little area is in pink down there. And perhaps some other wells in the area that had a well but no longer is viable anymore also need to backfill those wells. So we are currently reviewing those options and looking to address those requirements for the network. So all that being said, if your coalition reaches out to you about participating, you have a well that meets those very specific criteria, and we need it as a part of this program, please consider communicating and reaching out in that regard, because it's very important. And the alternative is potentially drilling mini monitoring wells, which is very expensive, which is not good for anyone in the coalition. So let's see. So we're going to transition here to Marissa. Nicole, I don't know if there were any specific questions. I know there's a lot of back and forth, but it looks like
There-
most were answered.
There is a question. Let me scroll back to it. Sorry, one sec.
Yeah, just to reiterate that the survey for this webinar will come at the end of the webinar. I know there's been a few questions about that, but that will come
Right,
at the end.
when you log out, when you go to log out of the webinar, a survey will pop up. It will also, if you ignore it at that point, it will also email you after you close out. So the question is, when AR management becomes regulated, there are some words missing. So I think it is when AR management becomes regulated, will it be based on individual performance, historic yields, or regional performance?
Okay, yes, I see that question there, Colby. So a lot goes into that. Excuse me. I think it's going to be both, really. There's going to be some per field requirements, such as the outlier process that we're currently doing. And there's also going to be more of this township aggregated information, but ultimately it's all going to come from those INMP summary reports. So it's not necessarily going to be addressed on historical yields. It's going to be, I guess you could call it that, but it's going to be based on the data actually submitted via the INMP summary reports, either individually or as the township aggregated. So those are going to be two parallel things that are running simultaneously, most likely in the future. Again, some of those details we don't have fully worked out yet, but that's just why we're trying to communicate that these things are coming, and we'll continue to do that as we have more info.
Right, and that was the only one that had not yet been answered.
Okay, well, we'll have more opportunities for questions, but with that, I'll pass it over for another program update to Marissa.
Sorry, forgot to mute. Thanks, Ryan. So I am Marissa Casaus. I'm also part of the technical team with Provost and Pritchard, and I handle most of the surface water monitoring program for the coalitions. And under the Tulare Lake Basin General Order, the coalition is also required to conduct surface water monitoring. And we do that to characterize the water quality within the coalition's boundary. And to do that, we take samples at designated sites throughout each coalition once a month if there is water to sample. So if you see on the picture right there to the right, there are 5 sites in the KRWCA boundary that we do monitor for, and they are along creeks Pozo Creek, Kern River, Takuya Creek, El Paso Creek, and Shenack Creek. And then with that, we are able to evaluate any water quality issues and then manage for that if we do find any. You can go to the next slide, Ryan. So like I said, as part of this program, we are required to go out once a month and grab a sample if there, again, is any enough water to sample for. And as you are all well aware, last year we got a lot of rain come through the system. And so that brought us to a total of 19 sites sampled in the year. And you can see on the table to the left of the screen that mostly started in December and then teetered off around May. And on the next slide, we have an overview of what we normally see in a regular year, even a dry year. we get at least 12 samples. So 19 is a lot for 1 year. 12 samples mostly comes from Kern River. Kern River is a perennial water body, which means it runs throughout the entire year. All of the other water bodies, including Pozo Creek, Takuya, El Paso, and Chinook Creek, they are all ephemeral water bodies, which means they mostly run intermittently and respond mostly to rain events. And so again, this is interesting because we haven't seen samples at Takuya or Pozo Creek in the last couple of years. So that rain really influenced our system, and we were able to get a lot of samples. We didn't see anything at El Paso Creek, at least when we went out, but we did make our, every best effort to check the sites as it was raining, and our crews made their best judgment, based on safety and those types of things. So that is also something we consider when we do go out sampling. Now, if you go to the next slide. So finally, we've been working through management plans. Like I mentioned, in addition to the monitoring that we must do, we are required to manage any water quality impacts that we find when we sample these sites. And per the general order, if we find more than one exceedance of any constituent, then we are required to either pursue a source identification study or a management plan. And so listed on the screen there, you see that we currently have 4 active management plans for 3 of our monitoring sites. And you'll also might notice that most of those were developed within the last year. I'm looking mostly at the Kern River Source ID study and management plan, as well as Pozo Creek. And again, that was because of all the water quality data that we were getting back with all the rain that came down. So in the next couple of slides, I did wanted to include just some pictures of the monitoring sites during the rainy season. March 2023, that was, I want to say, the peak of our rainy season, and we had a lot of water coming through the system. So this picture's rather interesting. I normally see these pictures and the sites are dry. Sometimes there's trash in the creeks, but this Pozo Creek was very full during that time. And then next picture, we have Kern River. Kern River, of course, like I said, it's a perennial water body. The level increased, but we were still able to grab a sample, but we did have to move back a little bit. As I said, the banks were kind of coming up a little bit with all the water coming through the system. And then lastly, here's Chinook Creek at the beginning of the rainy season. Chinook Creek is very interesting in that, even here at the beginning of the rainy season, it was relatively full. So it definitely topped over in March and April. So that is it for surface water monitoring. I will pass this back over to Ryan. Unless there are any questions.
Questions on the chat or raised hands? All right, Ryan, you're up.
Okay, just a couple more slides here for more of the coalition part. Then we're going to transition into a guest speaker presentation here. So this is going to be mostly verbatim to presentations in the past, but just on another component of the irrigated lands program, not necessarily directly managed by the coalition, but still has an impact on coalition members, and that's the on-farm drinking water well testing program. So basically, this is if you've been a part of this program, you're probably familiar with it, but on-farm drinking water wells must be tested annually for nitrate plus nitrite nitrogen. And so there's some terminology here on how we define an on-farm drinking water well, but it's defined as a well that is located on an APN enrolled in the coalition that actively provides water for human consumptive use. And the sampling window is the calendar year. And as most things, don't wait for the last minute, because there are specific certified labs that must get used, and there can be some bottlenecking there. But if the result is over that maximum contaminant level limit for drinking water, or MCL, of 10 milligrams per liter nitrate nitrogen, the member must provide notice to users using this particular nitrate notification template and send a copy of the completed template to the regional board. So it's a regulatory program. There's some paperwork and a process that must be followed. So we're just trying to remind everyone of that process. So you can find the form at the link there, and just some clips here of what that looks like for the nitrate notification template. Just a few reminders here is that you do not need to test your well if replacement bottled water in some form or fashion is being provided to the well user or users. but make sure you keep your receipts and records of that just in case there's some kind of audit or investigation into that. And also if your well was previously tested but exceeded the 10 milligrams per liter nitrate nitrogen and a notification template was provided to the drinking water user in the regional board, you do not need to necessarily continue testing your well. But otherwise, this is an annual requirement. So there is a list of regional board ELAP certified labs. As you can see here on the screen for the Bakersfield area, there's 3 primary ones that are listed there. So if you're wondering where can I get my sample analyzed, you can follow that link there and get some information on that, on labs to use. But so what's the actual method to use to get your well tested? Well, essentially, you're going to get your directions and kind of follow those line by line from the member information form. You're going to take your information to the lab and get the bottles and things that you need in the paperwork. Then you're going to take your sample, return that sample and in the proper sampling methods, return it to the lab with the paperwork. The lab will analyze it and upload the data to GeoTracker under its requirements and provide you with the results. And then, of course, if your results are greater than 10 milligrams per liter, provide the water user in the regional board with a copy of the drinking water notification form. And there's just one exception there listed on the screen. If it's only you and your immediate family consuming the water that exceeds that limit, and you indicate that on the form, you do not need to turn in that notification template to the regional board. So just some more clips of some of the information here in the member information form that you can go through there as you have to navigate this process. And then the on-farm drinking water well testing. Again, this is not a program directly administered by the coalition. So this is the last slide for this part of the presentation there. So if you have more questions, the coalition can certainly try to answer those, but really encourage folks to call the regional board as it's they are administering the program. So you have their information there to talk to them about this program. And so we just want to encourage folks to complete the meeting evaluation that's going to come at the end of the presentation there. So I see one question that I think Nicole had answered, but otherwise this is going to be the end of the coalition presentation, and then we're going to move into something a little more technical on irrigation and nitrogen management from some of our University of California partners here that are helping us try to address these various water quality issues that we have. So Nicole, do you see anything else you'd like to say or questions before we transition into the last presentation?
I do not. I answered the question that was posed, so we can continue.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll let and Mohammed there, if you could share your screen just by hitting the share screen button, that would be preferable.
Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Ryan and Nicole, for this invitation. Can you, I guess, can you see the screen?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Perfect. So again, I would like to thank Nicole and Ryan for the invitation here today. My name is Mohammed Yagmur, and I'm the Orchard Systems Advisor here in Kern County with the University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources. And today I'm just gonna I'm going to have a very general presentation about nitrogen and irrigation management. Why it's important to look at the nitrogen and irrigation management and how both of them work together, because as I will show in my presentation, both of them move together. First, before I start my presentation, I would like to introduce the Nitrogen and Irrigation Initiative Program. This program is throughout the San Joaquin Valley and also part of the coast here. Pretty much there's 6 farm advisors involved with this. This program actually in collaboration with the CDFA. The CDFA is providing the funding for this program, and the UC Davis is providing some of the evaluation of our administration for this program, and the UCNR is actually responsible for delivering the information to the growers in the San Joaquin Valley and on the coast. Down here in Kern County, I am responsible for this program. I also cover parts of Tulare County. Other collaborators here in the San Joaquin are Phoebe Gordon in Madera County and May Columber in Fresno County. We have each farm advisor also is associated with a staff research associate who will help us, go out and deliver the information or help the growers with their needs in terms of irrigation and nitrogen management. Again, this program is available to all the growers. So any grower can call us anytime, and we will be happy to go out and help whether with testing nitrogen in irrigation water, help the growers with their methods of leaf sampling, planting cover crops, or even on the irrigation side, we can help the growers with DU testing, which is very important when we are dealing with irrigation budgeting, estimating evapotranspiration, whether through having the growers sign up to our ET reports and other ways. So, before I start, also I would like to let all the members and all the attendees here that many of you may have known Blake Sandin before his retirement. Currently, we have Dr. Tobias Oker, who gladly accepted the position to serve as the irrigation and soil advisor down here in Kern County. So also please feel free to reach out to Tobias with any questions regarding your needs for soil and irrigation management issues. And from here, I'm just gonna move on to talk about the presentation. So when we are talking about the irrigation in particular, irrigation is very important for for plant growth and development. However, one of the things we need to understand when we are looking at the applying the irrigation water and plant needs, we need to understand about the photosynthesis and transpiration. Transpiration is the transformation of the water that has been absorbed by the plant all the way from the roots all the way to the leaves. It will transfer to the air after it become a gas. With this process, the transpiration, what will happen is as the water comes out from the stomata, on the leaf surface, carbon dioxide goes in, and as you may know, the importance of the leaf and the presence of CO2, which is carbon dioxide, and the water, and the presence of the sunlight, photosynthesis happens, and with that, the plant create food that will be translated into yields. So this is figures showing that why irrigation and nitrogen application is important. As I mentioned, with irrigation, the plant grows, we have bigger leaves. With the nitrogen is the same. When we have bigger leaves, that means our leaf area index is bigger. If we have a bigger leaf area index, that means that those leaves will have a better radiation use efficiency, which will translate to more photosynthesis and more yields. Okay, so how do we calculate the evapotranspiration? Simply the evapotranspiration is calculated by understanding the reference evapotranspiration, which is usually we get it from the CEMIS data here stations. It's a evaporative pan method. Those stations usually they have a grass around the evaporative pan. And we have a crop factor that we multiply by the reference evapotranspiration, and that's how we know how much our plants need in terms of irrigation. So, however, you know, with wet water, with well-watered crop, we can understand exactly the crop needs, but in many times we need to adjust that amount based on the environmental conditions. Sometimes, you know, the crop is under stress, or there's other conditions such as disease that will actually lower the evapotranspiration needed for the crop. This is a good study on pistachios showed that, you know, with increased photosynthetically active radiation measured, we have increase in AT, which is expected. Also with increased AT and increased photosynthetically active radiation, the yield will increase, which is one of the most important things why we are looking at crop growth, because at the end of the day, we grow to have good yields. This slide shows exactly what I meant with adjusted ET. For example, here on the left, okay, when we have young orchard needs less water compared to mature orchards. In the second picture, if we have cover crops may need more extra water compared to the seasonal needs of the crop. However, we did our cover crop research down here in Kern County, and all we found out that, you know, if you are using cover crops or if you are growing cover crops in an orchard, that amounted only for 1 extra inch. For example, if we needed 48 inches to grow an acre of an almond, mature almonds, if we are having or if we are growing cover crops, that means we need to add a total of 49 inches instead of 48. Other examples are when we are having trees with leaf defoliation. If we have leaf defoliation, that means, you know, we are having less evapotranspiration and the amount of irrigation needed to be adjusted. When it comes to nitrogen is one of the most important elements because it's very important for vegetative growth. You know, there are many sources that we apply to the soil to meet the demands of tree or crops growth, whether it's for the root system growth, wood, or for the leaves. So an important tool always to manage nitrogen is to have a nitrogen budget. And it should always be site-specific or grower-specific. With that, I mean, we have to, each crop has its needs. Also, depending on the soil, the amount of nitrogen, the types of the nitrogen, all of that should be taken in account. Also, as I mentioned earlier, you know, nitrogen will be moving with the water because, you know, nitrogen will be absorbed the same way by the roots, the same way the tree or the crop will absorb the water. So improved irrigation scheduling and uniformity and the adoption of irrigation designs for specific soil types is also very important. When we are applying nitrogen to the soil, what will happen depending on the source we are applying to the soil, some of it will convert to ammonium, and others will be converted to nitrates. When we are comparing those two elements that can be absorbed by the crop, okay, ammonium is usually more stable in the soil because the soil particles are negatively charged. Thus, nitrates are more readily leachable compared to ammonium. When we are looking at the budgeting of irrigation and nitrogen, I like to look at it in terms of three major components. The first one is the plant. The second part is the soil. And the third part is the irrigation system. So all those three components is actually the most important components when we are looking at irrigation and nitrogen budgeting. And why is that? So when we are talking about the plant, it's the plant's needs, whether it's from and the nitrogen, or how much water to apply for irrigation, which here we are talking about the evapotranspiration part. Soil texture is playing a major role. For example, we need to understand the water holding capacity, whether our soil has good infiltration rate or not. If we don't have good infiltration, that means quite a bit of the water that we are applying to the soil surface is going to be running off. And with that, we might be losing nitrogen, and we are losing water. While, the irrigation and nitrogen management have environmental impacts, I also like to include that also it has economic impacts. I come from a farming background, and economics plays a major role when it comes to growing crops. So I don't always look at the things from only scientific and from environmental point of view, but also many things has economic disadvantages if we don't take in consideration the proper way to irrigate and fertilize. So the last part is the irrigation system, and here I'm talking about the whether we have drip or surface irrigation system, the efficiency, the distribution uniformity, all of that plays big role when we are looking at the irrigation and nitrogen budgeting. So to take each component by itself, when we are looking at the plant part, the most important part is the crop water requirements. And here I'm talking about whether the growers is going to take in consideration the crop evapotranspiration, which usually we need to meet the crop evapotranspiration to replenish the plant with the lost water and meet its demands, or some of it is based on the CEMES data or the ET reports we put out every week to the growers. Some of it is plant-based technology, such as the use of Thule system. So we have many resources that growers can rely on when it comes to crop water requirements. And here I'm talking about the evapotranspiration. So for us here down in Kern County, we have a list, and we start putting out our evapotranspiration reports pretty much early March. So if you would like to be on that list and receive our evapotranspiration reports, please feel free to email us, and we'll happy to add you to the list, and we put that list every week. The other one, as I mentioned, is looking at the actual evapotranspiration, such as the Thule system, and that's usually is based in specific orchards with the growers who use that service. Here's an example of what our ET report looks like. And for example, here in Kern County, we put the ET report based on 3 CMS data stations: Shafter, Arvin, Edison, and Burridge. With that report, it will show what the actual use for the ET for the last week, what is the total season so far for each crop here, and what we are expecting the coming week ET to be. And down here below is actually telling the growers how much water they need to add based on their irrigation system efficiency. For example, if we are looking here that we get last week, for example, for almond, for this report, it was 2.5 inches. All right, if you have a 65% efficient system, then the grower will need to add 3 inches of water. Here's another report from a different county. It's similar to the one I showed earlier. However, the farm advisor here put an extra information where actually they calculated each tree, how many gallons will be needed to irrigate based on certain or assumed number of trees per acre. For example, if we are assuming here for almond, 115 trees per acre, okay, and last week evapotranspiration for the crop was 1.5, then we need to add approximately each tree will need 520 gallons just to replenish what the tree already consumed and used to meet its needs. This is a slide to show you for the growers who are on our list. You may have seen this in the past 2 to 3 years. So sometimes, during drought conditions, which happened 2 years ago and more, the grass dries up. The results from the CMS stations are no longer reliable. So we will cross out this information from last week. However, it's important to know that this estimated ET for the coming week usually is based on the historical data, and that should always be valid, and the growers can always use it. This is another example of the actual evapotranspiration in growers' orchard. Here is from Thule Technologies, where actually they can use the stations around that orchard as well as the station in here. It's worth noting that some of those companies will provide more extra information. Here, for example, the company provide actually an important information, which is the soil water holding capacity. And I will explain later how we can use that information, because it's always important to know how much my soil can hold water. That will affect the frequency of irrigation and many other things when it comes to irrigation budgeting. So soil texture, soil type, and soil texture, it's soil type and soil texture can affect our water holding capacity, whether we have sandy loam, or clay soil. Infiltration rate, for sure. Sandy soils has more infiltration rate compared to clay soil. It can affect our irrigation frequency. So the soils that can't hold much water, like sandy soils, probably we need to have more frequent irrigations compared to other type of soil. How can we get that information? We can get that information when we are looking at the soil from, we have several resources. Here's one of the most important resources that I use in my office here. and I use the UC Davis Soil Web. This is pretty much a platform that uses Google Earth. With that, you just need to zoom on your orchard or your soil, and it will tell you the type of your soil and other important information that you can use for your irrigation scheduling and nitrogen management. So soil type, as I mentioned, is very, very important when we are talking about the water holding capacity and how leachable is that soil. So here's two soil triangles. So as I mentioned, sandy soils on sandy, the more the soil is sandy, it has low water holding capacity, but it has high infiltration rate. When we are talking about sandy loam soils, it has medium water holding capacity and medium infiltration rate. And finally, when we have clay soil, it has high water holding capacity but lower infiltration rate. Again, how that is important. It's important. It tells me whether how easy it is those soils are leachable. The more we go up towards clay soil, the less chance of leaching, and vice versa. If we move down the triangle, the higher the chances of leaching, whether we are leaching soils or we are leaching in nutrients. So when we are talking about soil water holding capacity, it's very important to understand how much water can our soils hold. For example, if this is a column of soil, and let's say our soil can hold 12 inches, all right? 12 inches is when the soil completely saturated. After gravity leaching, okay, and the loss of the water during to gravity, let's say we have 10, we lose 2 inches. Another 2 inches is to our permanent wilting points. If we reach the water permanent point, that means the plant reach a point where it not can recover. However, what we really care about is the plant available water. And let's say it's an 8 inches. So with those 8 inches, it's important to know the manageable allowable depletion. And the manageable allowable depletion is the amount of water, okay, I will allow the plant to use that amount of water before I say, okay, I want to replenish that water that has been used. So in a nutshell, this will be important in my management for the frequency, how many times I need to irrigate. Some growers will let the management allowable depletion to be approximately 40% before they come and replenish what the plant has already used. For example, if my plant available water is 4 inches and my manageable allowable depletion is 6 inches, I will say, okay, 50% is 3 inches. If I have good soil sensors and I can, calculate that the plant has already used 3 inches, okay, then I say it's time to irrigate. And the last part of this triangle that I like to use is the irrigation system. For sure, understanding our irrigation system, whether it's current or our future design for irrigation system, is important. Especially, we need to understand the flow rate, the efficiency, distribution uniformity of the system. Those are all important. With also understanding our different types of soil. We might have like 2 different type of soil texture in the orchard. Maybe we will be able to do what we call variable irrigation. In a nutshell, irrigating one type of soil differently from the other one to be very efficient in the way we apply irrigation water and nitrogen. And this is exactly what we need to do in terms to understand our system to be able to have good irrigation budgeting plan. When we are talking about the distribution system, if distribution uniformity is more than 85%, then it's good. If it is not, then we have to understand why the distribution uniformity is not as good and try to fix. For example, we might have leaks, we might have vertebrate problems, and other issues. It's also important to know when we don't have efficient systems, that means also there is an extra economic burden that comes from extra electricity, extra use of water. With in certain years, the price of the water might be higher compared to others, and other economic reasons why we need to be more efficient with our systems. How much water we need to apply? There is a very simple equation that we use when we want to calculate how much water we need to apply. That will depend on the flow rate, how many hours we need to run our system, and the acreage we need to irrigate. And with different, this is the same equation. With different inputs, we can always calculate exactly how much water to apply based on the system, or we can even, if we know the other inputs, we can actually know how much we need to run our system, how much time we need to run our system to add the required amount of water. This is an example of a citrus orchard where we know that in the previous week, we needed to add 1.1, approximately 1.1 inches of water to meet the ET requirements. If we have an efficient system that is 85%, that means I need to add 1.2 inches of water to meet the required water that has been used by the plant. So very simple calculations. If, as I mentioned, we need approximately 1.1 inches, we divide it by the system efficiency, and we get how much water we need to exactly apply to meet the requirements of the ET. So when we add that amount, we have to take in consideration whether there is other sources of water that contributed to the evapotranspiration used by the crop. And here I'm talking mainly about rain. If we have rain, then we have to subtract the amount of rain that was accumulated during the week. Usually, here in Kern County, it's mostly dry during the growing season. So for many parts of the growing season, that is 0. So we actually need to apply the 1.25 inches. For example, let's assume that our application rate through our drip system is 0.09 inches per hour we apply. So how many hours do I need to run my system to meet the amount I need to apply? Is we just divide the 1.25 inches over the application rate, and that will give me the amount of hours I need to run my system. When we are talking about the nitrogen management and budgeting, that is always need to rely on what we call the 4 R's. So the 4 R's is that I need always to put the right rate. And that is, for example, when we are talking about almonds, it depends on the tree demand, which is based on the crop. That's why understanding the yield and how much is my yield is very important. However, also that can be very tricky because we don't have an excellent way to estimate the yield. So, for example, I can expect that I have 4,000, but then 4,000 pounds of, for example, of almond. However, during the season, I have some stress issues. My well went down, the tree dropped some of that. So we always need to take in consideration during the season to fine tune our nitrogen or our nutrient demands. The right time, we always need to add the nitrogen and the nutrients when the plant needs it. And we have to put it in the right place, which is the root system, because those nutrients gonna be absorbed by the roots. So anything below the root zone is gonna be a waste. And also we have to take in consideration the source, whether we are using different sources of nitrogen. For example, we are talking here about nitrates, CAN 17, and other sources, including manure and others. So the primary components of any nitrogen budget should include the demand based on the yield assessment. As I mentioned, we have to take in consideration the nitrogen credits, the amount of nitrogen that is in the irrigation water, the manure, if we apply manure, compost, or even the cover crops. And also we have to account for the additional amount of nitrogen needed based on nitrogen efficiency use. Here's an example of what a well water analysis will look like. I have 2 examples. The first one is to look that it will include nitrate, how much nitrate. The second one, actually, it tells me nitrate nitrogen, which is different from the nitrate alone. We have good resources. Here's the table that you can just use it. There's the factors. For example, if your irrigation water has nitrate only, then this is the multiplication factor to get how many parts of nitrogen you are actually applying per acre based on irrigation calculated in inch. The second one, for example, is if you're gonna use acre foot, okay? So it will tell you exactly how much by multiplying by this factor. So this is an example of a nitrogen budget, a plan. This is just a rough nitrogen management plan components. If I assume that, you know, I come and I assess that my trees has 3,000 acres, 3,000 pounds of kernel expected crop load. However, the credits from the irrigation water and the compost is 57. But my needs really is this per 1,000 of crop load, the tree will need 68 pounds. By 3, that means that that we need 204 pounds of nitrogen, pure nitrogen, per acre. Taking the credits in consideration, that means the crop will need to have 3,000. I need to apply 147 of N. Now, this is the most important part, which is, let's assume that my nitrogen use efficiency is 70%. That means I will need what? I will need an extra 63 pounds of N. The higher this value, okay, the more my savings on the amount of nitrogen I need to add to, account for the nitrogen use efficiency. So in total, I will need to apply 210 pounds of nitrogen to meet a crop load of 3,000. So in summary, it's, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important to understand our soil texture, especially the water holding capacity, the leachability of the soil, and how the soils will be important for the irrigation frequency. We have to consider also the water quality, especially if we need to add a leaching fraction. Irrigation system and energy cost is important to take those in consideration. And the most important part is to look at the crop water requirements. Whether you are using the ET reports or the actual ET systems, that's what we need to base our irrigation on. Nitrogen budget following the 4 R's is the best way. And always remember to fine tune your irrigation and nitrogen budget based on whether the crop load or any other inputs we have. For example, the distribution uniformity in our system or other factors that is important to take in consideration. With that, thank you very much. And I'll turn it back to Ryan in case we have any questions or time for questions.
Thank
Yeah,
you
I'm
so
not.
much, Mohammed. Sorry,
Sorry?
Ryan. I'm
Go ahead.
jumping in.
Please.
We appreciate your time in participating in our meeting, Mohammed and your team, and appreciate all of our growers for sticking with us for the 2-hour meeting. Typically, just as a reminder, our meetings are scheduled from 3 to 5, and we did take every minute of that this year. Last year, we let you out a little early, so I just ask that you prepare for 2 hours maximum unless we notify you that it's going to be longer than that. When you log out of the webinar, you should receive your survey at that time. And again, there will, if you don't complete it, then you will have a follow-up survey emailed to you from Zoom. Might look like it comes from Courtney Mancor. Either way, we do appreciate your time and ask you to complete your survey at your convenience. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye. Brianna, I believe as the host, do you have to exit out?
Okay, just making sure we're good to go. I'll see you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.